Hi, and welcome back to the next part of our World War One series. This time we're focusing on the Spring Offensive in 1918, sometimes called Ludendorff's Offensive, sometimes called the Spring Offensive, by the Germans, of course, called the Kaiserschlacht. So by this stage you should have already taken a look at the key turning points in the war. In particular, according to our syllabus, we should be looking at the Russian withdrawal and the American entry. And that helps us to understand the setting up for Ludendorff's Spring Offensive and the reasons why it goes ahead. Here we've got Hindenburg and Ludendorff. Remember, they're in charge now in Germany, but Ludendorff on the right is really our military brains. And so he is really the one who's determining the military offensives that need to go ahead. Now, with the Americans on their way, Ludendorff is very, very aware of the need for Germany to really win the war before the Americans come in any numbers. And they're coming. Everyone knows they're coming. They haven't arrived on the front just yet, but they're on their way. The situation at home in Germany, Ludendorff is very aware of the problems on the German home front and the lack of reserves. They've now got this influx of, about an extra million Germans taken from the Eastern Front after the Russian withdrawal, moved across to the Western Front. So this is it. This is the time. It's do or die kind of attitude. Why do they want to try to push now? Well, have a think about this. Here's our familiar map of the Western Front, just drawn in there. So you can see the difference between Belgium in the north, up here, and also down in the south is France. And here's our line as it is at the end of 1917. Now, Germany, of course, wants to stay there and, if possible, even push further in towards Paris if they can. Change my So pushing in closer towards Paris if they can, gain as much possible ground before they start negotiating any kind of peace treaty. Just imagine, if they were being pushed back out of France, out of Belgium, back into Germany and trying to negotiate a peace situation from that position. Germany's been here for 4 years. They want to keep this dominant position in order to put them in a good negotiating position for the future. So it's really important from Ludendorff's perspective to do this and do it now before the Americans come and really start to show up the lack of German reserves that they have. So we enter into what's called the Spring Offensive, or as I said, the Kaiserschlacht, which means Kaiser's battle. And it's really actually a series of offensives. So we can see here a map we're going to take a much closer look at, but it's not just one place. You can see most of the battles we've looked at up until this point have been, focused in one area, and they just push and push this war of attrition. The Ludendorff Spring Offensives in 1918 are planned to be different. They plan to actually attack the line at different times and then stop and move to a different part of the line. Have a think about that. That's great because your opponents are going to be scrambling all over the line, not knowing where to send their reserves, not knowing where to send the spare men to bolster the line as you start attacking. So this is the plan from the very beginning. And the very first offensive, which is let loose, is called Operation Michael, and it goes in this direction. So you can see that's the dotted one is the line at the beginning of this offensive in early 1918, and on the 21st of March, the Germans let loose and push into this direction. Now, there's 5 different aspects of this offensive we're going to take a look at. If you can't remember the names of all of them, that's fine. The important thing to understand is that it is a series of offences, one after the other. We've got 5 in total, and we'll take a look later at why they stop. But we've got a series of offences that are very well planned and very well coordinated. So this first one here is we're going to push in this area near the Somme, really, and eventually, of course, like always in many ways, the Germans are going to break through and be able to control these ports up here. That would be nice. Open up further access for the Germans. And how are they going to do it? They are going to do it using small mobile units of shock troops, our stormtroopers. They're going to be armed with flamethrowers, light machine guns, and light trench mortars. Small groups that are going to be able to infiltrate. So it's called the infiltration tactic. You can see here small groups of men who are able to move forward. They carry light machine guns with them, and they don't have to march in a line, as we've seen some of the kind of attacks that have happened in the past. Instead, they are given quite a lot of flexibility to actually move forward, infiltrate, move around key targets, leave them behind, but infiltrate behind enemy lines in small groups. So this infiltration tactic is used. I want to show you one other thing. A German tank. I haven't shown you a picture of a German tank before. They weren't used a lot. They certainly weren't used as effectively as the British started using their tanks towards the end of the war. But just a reminder here that the Germans did build tanks, and here's one that is used in this first offensive taking place in 1918. So the attack itself actually opened with a very heavy artillery bombardment, including a lot of use of mustard gas. And luckily for the Germans, thick fog was out on the first morning and provided a lot of cover for the German troops who went out on the first day. Now, the thing to understand here is how well the German offensive went at the beginning. Within 4 days, the Allies had been pushed back 45 kilometres. Not this piddly little 2 kilometres and things like that we've talked about before. 4 days, 45 kilometres. And after 10 days, they had captured 90,000 Allied soldiers, taken them prisoners of war, and we've seen the Germans at this point gain more ground than they have at any other point in the war. However, the French dig in, try to hold them off, and we see them stopping them by the 5th of April. At this point, the Germans break off the offensive, and as we will see, they move the offensive to a different part of the line. But just imagine the impact that this is going to have on the Allies. Early 1918, the Germans have finally come up with a massive offensive, and here they are. They seem to be marching towards Paris again. So the impact of this first offensive, we have to stop and think about it because it did have a big impact on the Allies. You might remember here we've got Douglas Haig in charge of the British armies, and Pétain is in charge of the French at this stage. Now they've got different ideas about what to do here. Now the British, who remember are in the northern part of the line up here, want to hold as long as they possibly can, dig in and stop the German offensive. Pétain, however, who, remember, he's the guy who doesn't want to waste his French troops, and we can see that the Germans have just made significant inroads against the French down here. Here's what he wants to do. He wants to pull all the French troops back to Paris. Pull them all back. Protect Paris. Defend Paris. Now what would happen then? There'd be a split between the British left up here and the French who've withdrawn back closer to Paris. So this wasn't going to be a great idea if they went ahead and did different things. So, for the first time in the war, Haig agreed that things were so desperate, so dire, that he would be happy, well, not happy, but he would agree to go under the command of one overall commander. Pétain agreed as well. They agreed in these desperate situations to actually appoint one over commander, basically, to basically make the strategic decisions, These guys would stay in charge of their armies in the field, but they went ahead. And here we go, we've got General Foch. Now, you might remember him. This is the guy that was in charge of the French army at the beginning of the war. Very well respected. They have to have somebody who's well respected by both the British and the French in order to take on this position. So from 26th of March, we've got General Foch as he becomes the Allied Commander-in-Chief. Initially, he's got authority to coordinate the operations between our British and our French armies. From the 3rd of April, he expands his powers, and he now has the ability to give strategic direction to the armies. By the 14th of April, he's officially given full authority over the British, the French, and even the Americans. We've got General Pershing here on the right. General Pershing is very clear, however, that American troops must go under American generals in the field, but all three agree to follow the strategic directions given to them by General Foch here. Okay, so what happens now? The Allies have got a bit desperate, changed their command structure, but the Germans continue. So we saw this first German offensive here, which stops in the 5th of April. Then we launch the second offensive, Georgette, and in we go on the 9th of April. And this one is up in this area of Flanders, back up in Belgium, trying to take the town of Ypres. They almost do it, don't quite do it. However, what we do see is taking quite a lot of ground. On the first day alone, 6 kilometres is taken. The British are being pushed back. Things are looking pretty desperate. And we've got a lot of fierce fighting. We've got a lot of people dying in 1918, okay? The war's not over yet. However, the British dig in, the British hold quite well, and Ludendorff breaks off the offensive, not like it says here on the 11th, but actually on the 29th of April, he breaks it off. But again, it's a short, sharp offensive. It's got a particular goal. It's got a particular aim. And when that stops, he moves to a different part of the line. And we'll come back in the next video and just finish off the end of this Ludendorff spring offensive and see what happens.